Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a bit about the Minnesota Timberwolves. As we head towards the 2024 season, which is a couple of months away, I'm trying to evaluate how I feel about every single team. And one team that's kind of perplexed me up until now is Minnesota, because last year I bought heavily into the hype, and it burned me. If you haven't been on the channel for a year now, which if you have, shout out to you, but if you weren't here back then, back in 2023 when I was leading into last season, I made a full season predictions video, and in that, I predicted where every team was going to land in the standings, and I said Minnesota was going to be the 2 seed out west heading into the playoffs, only behind the 1 seeded Denver Nuggets. I got that part right. The Minnesota part was nowhere near close. It was a weird year for them where they didn't live up to the hype that I had for them, and I did say in that video that I didn't think they were championship contenders. I just saw them as a great regular season team, but they ended up being neither. Let's talk about why I bought into the hype. Number one, I believed, like most people, that Anthony Edwards was in for a big time leap. He had a great sophomore season where he quickly established himself as one of the brightest young stars in the league, which makes sense. He was a number 1 overall pick, but he really kind of burst onto the scene as the Timberwolves made the playoffs as the 7 seed and faced off against the Memphis Grizzlies in a series that they were better for a majority of. Now they blew a bunch of double-digit leads and ended up losing to Memphis, but if they just stopped making so many mental errors and actually hit some shots and stop collapsing down the stretch consistently, which I guess is a lot to ask, there's a real chance that Minnesota could have won that series. So coming into this upcoming year, I expected that Ant, being the now leader and face of that team, was going to take another leap to all-stardom and maybe even become an all-NBA player. Also, I was somewhat of a believer in the Rudy Gobert trade. Now, did I like the package they gave up? No, it was a ton, and I really didn't think it was worth it, but I did think it would make them a better team. I didn't know, again, if it would translate into playoff success, but I thought that at the very least it would make them a better regular season team. Rudy Gobert gave them a rim protector, which could help elevate their defense, and they already showed a ton of offensive flashes, so you mix those two things together, I thought they could be a really solid team on both ends of the floor. Of course, that does rely on KAT figuring out how to play the 4, and Rudy Gobert figuring out how to play next to another big like that, which I thought could lead to some in-season growing pains, but ultimately I didn't think it would matter too much, and they would still be towards the top of the conference standings. Again, that just wasn't the case. It was just a strange season for the franchise. The big question was, of course, could KAT and Rudy Gobert coexist together in the front court? And we thought we'd have an answer by now, but instead, the two of them only played 27 games together because KAT missed most of the year. Now, despite his absence, they were able to stay afloat partially because of the addition of Rudy Gobert, which does raise their floor substantially because even if KAT's out, Gobert can still be a high-level big. He helped them maintain a really solid defense on the year, and also, you saw the jump from Anthony Edwards that everybody was expecting, which additionally helped them stay in the running for playoff seeding. He became an all-star, averaging 24.6 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, 4.4 dimes, 1.6 steals, while shooting 46% from the field and 37% from deep, and playing some pretty solid defense. Nobody was surprised at the leap that he took, but some of the stuff he did on the court was very impressive. He was phenomenal last year, and it allowed the Timberwolves to stay afloat, go 1 game above 500 in their games without KAT on the season. The T-Wolves also got great play from Jaden McDaniels, who I strongly believe should have made an all-defensive team. He was phenomenal on the end this past year, locking up anyone and everybody. He's a near 7-foot guy that can switch on the perimeter, guard almost any single position. He was amazing. I think he's going to continue to be one of the league's best defenders for years to come. They got pretty good play from D'Lo as well before he was dealt for Mike Conley, who also performed well in this time with the team post-trade deadline. Naz Reid was one of the best backup bigs in the entire league. Kyle Anderson was solid amongst other players. They were a decent team, but again, it was only good enough for them to get an 8 seed in a pretty close Western Conference. They lost their first playing game to the Los Angeles Lakers, which was very close. They nearly took that one, but ended up beating Oklahoma City in the second one to make the NBA playoffs. In their lone series they played there, they faced off against the future NBA champions and the team I thought they would finish right behind it in the standings, the Denver Nuggets. And if you just take a look at the series outcome, which was 4-1 in favor of Denver, you would think that this was nowhere near close, but there were some really close games all throughout this series. Outside of game 1, where the Wolves lost by like 30 points, every matchup was decided by single digits, including a loss by the Timberwolves in game 5 that was decided right at the buzzer by a 3 from Anthony Edwards, which he just barely missed, which would have sent things to overtime. And despite this miss, Ant was the main reason why this series was so close. On the series as a whole, he put up 31.6 points per game, 5 rebounds, 5.2 dimes, 1.8 steals, and 2 blocks, while shooting 48.2% from the field, 35% from 3, and 84.6% from the line. He was incredible in the series and really did all he could to help Minnesota extend the series beyond a sweep and keep things really close with, again, the eventual NBA champions. In fact, if you ask Bruce Brown, who gave the Nuggets their toughest playoff series en route to their title, he'll tell you it's Minnesota. He gave that answer on a podcast earlier this offseason. And Minnesota went up against Denver without Jaden McDaniels, their best perimeter defender, who I talked about earlier, should have probably been on an all-defensive team and will probably make multiple over the course of his career because he broke his hand right before the end of the season. And Naz Reid was also not there, again, one of the best backup bigs in the league because he had a fractured wrist. Now, I don't think the presence of Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid tips the series in the favor of the Timberwolves pulling off the 8-1 upset, but I do think that they're both really good and give Minnesota maybe another win in that series, or at least keeps those games even more close than they already were. If you just take a look at the result of the season, which is a first-round exit after trading basically all your assets for Rudy Gobert, you probably think that the Timberwolves last year were a massive disappointment, and I guess, again, by results, you could say that maybe they were. But I think the more that I take a look at what they did last season, the circumstances that they were put in, and the end result, which again was a first-round loss, but a really competitive one against the reigning NBA champions, I think there are a lot of positives that the Timberwolves can build off of going into the season. And so I think, again, I'm buying into this team. No, I'm not going to say they're going to be the 2 seed or anything like that because I refuse to be burned in that same fashion. But I do think that the Wolves can be one of the more competitive teams in the Western Conference and be way better than people are giving them credit for. I feel pretty confident from everything we've seen so far in saying that we're going to see another big-time leap from Ant this upcoming season. He's going to be amazing. I think we could see a Shea-type explosion from him, where he's an all-star caliber player, but he takes a leap, becomes an all-NBA guy, and is suddenly in the conversation for some of the best guards in the entire league. I think that's what we're going to see from Ant this upcoming season, and we've seen flashes of it again in the playoffs, and we're seeing some of it now with Team USA. Right now, Team USA has played some preliminary games for the FIBA World Cup. They play their first actual game tomorrow as I'm uploading this video, so if you want to watch that, I think it's at like 5 or 6 a.m. Eastern time. So I don't know if I'll actually be up for that, but at the very least, I'll check out some of the highlights. And so far through those preliminary games that I've watched, Ant has been amazing. He's been the best player on this Team USA team. He's been their leader. He's dominated. He's looked confident out there, attacking whatever coverages opposing teams throw at him. And often it's a lot because they know how good he is. He's hitting like double clutch, fading away mid-range jumpers. He's using his high-level athleticism to attack off the catch or just go straight at defenders regardless of who is in front of him. It's impressive. By the time his career is wrapped, I wouldn't be surprised if Ant has an MVP. And in fact, if the Wolves take a big-time leap or one of the best teams in the Western Conference and Ant takes the jump like I think he can, I wouldn't be surprised if, similar to Shea, again, kind of comparing the leaps that I think Ant might take this year and the leap that Shea took last year, I think there's a real chance that he finishes top 10 in MVP voting or maybe even gets some serious consideration for the award if the Timberwolves really make some noise. Outside of Anthony Edwards, I'm also really high on Jaden McDaniels. He played all defensive level defense this past season. Like I said, probably snubbed off the team, but he was of that caliber of defender. And meanwhile, he averaged 12.1 points per game, which was a career high, and shot 51.7% from the field and nearly 40% from deep. He's a perfect fit on this team next to Ant and their bigs as a floor spacing lockdown defender that can play multiple positions and gives them even more size in that front court, making them a nightmare to match up against. In fact, according to reports, he's 6'11 now, and with KAT and Gobert both being about 7 feet tall, you've got nearly 3 7-footers that each do something different out there in that front court, which is kind of terrifying to play against if you're an opposing team. Plus, Jaden McDaniels is just 22 years old. I think he's got such an underrated star ceiling. If the ball handling comes along, if his self-creation comes along too, with that high-level defense, I think there's a real chance that someday Jaden McDaniels is an all-star caliber player. Now, I don't know if it'll happen soon, especially because there's so much talent around him, which is going to prevent him from really ever spreading his wings like that, but I think someday he could very well become that caliber of player. Going to the guard position, I really liked a lot of what I saw from Mike Conley as a veteran playmaker for the Wolves in the short time that he was there last season. It was clear that he and Rudy Gobert still have that great chemistry chemistry that they showed a lot of times in their Jazz days, which I think is really helpful for trying to continuously assimilate Rudy Gobert into this team, figure out how to best maximize the offensive abilities of Gobert, of Towns, of the rest of this squad. I think Mike Conley is a great fit to do so, and I like the idea of picking him up. Plus, they got some other assets they'll talk about later, in addition for trading D'Angelo Russell. One thing I do worry about with Mike Conley this upcoming season is some possible regression. We've been seeing it over the past couple of years, and he is going into his age 36 season, but I do think that for the role that he's in, which is pretty limited in terms of scoring and more so just focuses on him distributing the ball, I think ultimately he'll probably be fine, but it is certainly something to keep an eye on this year and especially in the coming seasons. I also think Minnesota has had a great offseason. They retained Naz Reid, a really great backup big that gives them even more depth in that really stacked front court. They brought in Troy Brown, who was pretty solid for the Lakers this past season, to replace Taurean Prince. I think Prince is a bit better, but I do think Troy Brown can somewhat replicate a decent number of that production that Prince did bring to the table. They brought in Shake Milton from the Philadelphia 76ers, a really underrated guard in my opinion, that will give them some more bench scoring. They retained Gilgeous-Alexander Walker, who wasn't great last season, but he really caught a stride towards the end of the year, and he's still pretty young. And again, going back to FIBA, for Team Canada, he's looked really good so far. The shot has been nice. He's had some great finishes. He's been playmaking well. I like the idea of Na on this team as another young piece that has some high upside, and if it doesn't work out, it's really no big deal. They also drafted Leonard Miller, who I like, who showed out in Summer League, and I think he could crack the rotation from day one and make some decent contributions. They've built a pretty solid squad over there that I think could genuinely surprise a lot of people this upcoming season. Defensively, I think they're going to be really good on that end. They've got Rudy Gobert and Jaden McDaniels anchoring thing with some solid personnel around. They've just got to build some offensive cohesion. They really struggled offensively this past season, but I think if you get KAT healthy for a full year, who is still one of the best stretch bigs of all time, you have Mike Conley in town now as a playmaker who can help create some better opportunities for Rudy Gobert, perhaps with that chemistry that they've already got together. Plus, now you've already played a full year with this team together, so you've probably built some chemistry on that end as well. I think those things could come a long way to helping them be a better offense this season than they were last year. Now, that all sounds great, but you've probably noticed there are two big name players on this team that I haven't talked about in depth and instead have only alluded to over the course of the video, and that's because I really want to save them for the end here, because I think these two guys are really what the Minnesota Timberwolves upcoming season and future really hinges on, and that's Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Their big man duo that we were hoping we'd know a little bit more about last season, but instead we head into this upcoming year still really not knowing if it can actually work. Again, like I mentioned earlier, last season they played just 27 games together, and in those matchups they went 14-13, which isn't a great record. You're trying to be a championship contender. You want to be above 500 when two of your best three players are sharing the court. To make matters worse, when they were actually on the court together, they outscored opponents by just 0.43 points per 100 possessions, which is really mediocre. It was kind of a tale of two sides of the court, because defensively, when this duo was out there, the Wolves were locking up in the possessions that they played together, which was a bit over 1,000. The Timberwolves ranked in the 98th percentile defensively. They gave up just 106.4 points per 100 possessions, which for last season was really, really good. I think having just two big bodies like that and KAT and Gobert out there makes things annoying. Plus, you add Jaden McDaniels to the mix, who is an all-defensive caliber player and also nearly 7 foot. It's just a weird look to throw at opposing teams that makes things really difficult for opposing scorers. The problem is, while they were clamping on one end, they were throwing up bricks on the other, because when KAT and Gobert were out there offensively, the Timberwolves ranked in the 7th percentile in points per 100 possessions, which is completely abysmal. It's not just bad, it's terrible. It was a clunky fit. They could never really figure out how to optimize those two guys on the offensive end, in addition to the overall offensive struggles that the Wolves had last season. It's a big time concern. Obviously, this isn't the biggest sample size in the world, but I think it's enough to be somewhat concerned about how they're going to look this upcoming year. Now, there are reasons to be optimistic. If you have KAT for a full season, you get the chance to have the two of them really build a rhythm together and figure out how to truly integrate him into this offense. Maybe you get that leap from Anthony Edwards, which brings more of a scoring punch. Mike Conley's playmaking helps out. The offensive addition of like Shake Milton, maybe you get a jump from Gilgeous-Alexander Walker. I think there's multiple avenues to this Wolves offense improving that makes things feel a lot better for the team. But if it doesn't come along, if things still look clunky, if the Wolves are underperforming, a lot of people are going to look at this duo of Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert as the current problem, and that probably will end up being the case. Really, their success this year and beyond relies really heavily on these two guys. And if they disappoint, I think it's pretty clear that going into the following season, one of them will not be on the roster. And if you ask me, it's probably Karl-Anthony Towns. I know he's been a staple of the Wolves for a while, but I think it makes way more sense to trade him than Gobert, mainly because you gave up way too much for Gobert to just go ahead and give up on this experiment after a couple of years. You gave up like 5 first-round picks, Walker Kessler, who already looks great for Utah. You gave up pretty much everything, your entire future, to bring Rudy Gobert in to help fix the defense. You're going to get basically no return on investment for a player like him, who is still really good, but he's going to be 32, 33 years old at that point. And with the big time contract that he's got, you're giving up on him because it's not working out. Teams aren't going to give up that much of value. Meanwhile, for KAT, he's still relatively young. He's still a good stretch big. I think you could get a lot more for KAT that could help round out the roster and maybe make this thing work than you would ever possibly get from Gobert. This is a monumental moment for this Timberwolves franchise. They've got a rising superstar in Anthony Edwards, a pretty good supporting cast. It's just a matter of if it's actually going to work and if they can break through in a really crowded Western Conference. If they're able to do so, they look like geniuses, and hey, maybe they end up becoming championship contenders pretty soon. But if they don't, they're going to have to maybe trade their longtime face of the franchise and Karl-Anthony Towns, or otherwise admit that, hey, this Rudy Gobert thing was a horrific mistake and trade him away for not much return at all. Like I've said all throughout this video, I'm optimistic and think the Wolves, if they put it together, will be one of the best teams in the Western Conference. But it's definitely not guaranteed. They're a wild card out there, which I think makes things really exciting. That's the case for a number of teams in the West this year, and really the NBA as a whole. It's part of why I'm super excited for this upcoming season. With all that being said, I think that's all I've got for the Minnesota Timberwolves right now. Let me know your thoughts on this team down below in the comments. Do you think they're going to be really good this year? Do you think they're going to struggle? If you had to trade one of these two bigs, who would you end up dealing? I actually dropped a poll about that on Twitter, and y'all literally split it up the middle 50-50, which was kind of ridiculous. Love to hear y'all's opinions here in the YouTube comment section. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I'm going to be doing more team breakdowns as the offseason goes on, some player breakdowns too, some historic videos. I need to get back on those. Those take up a lot of time. I have quite a few in the works at the moment, so hopefully those will be dropping soon. But yeah, appreciate y'all watching as always. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.